Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 10th of September 2023. There's going to be a gap between my first one and my second one today because my son has rugby training and we have a cake sale because there's going to be his first ever tour. He's 13, I've got 13-year-old twins. His first ever rugby tour is going to be to the exotic next year. It's not France. No, it's not Ireland. What's the exotic tour location? Skegness. So if you know your British history or British culture and geography, Skeggy is an interesting choice for the first tour. But nonetheless, we've got a cake sale, so I've got to get there and help sell cakes and whatnot. So sorry that the second one will be a little bit delayed. I'm proudly wearing my England top tonight. I don't get very nationalistic, apart from when it comes to rugby. Then some switch goes in my head. Probably because I used to play and it turns me a bit mental. Anyway, and England played Argentina yesterday, and I'm not a big fan of George Ford, but yesterday I was a big fan of him. Amazing. Right, hardly any of you care about that. A few select few, awesome. Right, the Russian losses for the day before, as according to the Ukrainian General Staff, all the caveats are in the list below. Thank you to the guy who provided that. I'm going to give you the name tomorrow, I promise the name. Okay, 490 personnel lost. 10, so that's down from 600 yesterday. That is, I don't know what that particularly signifies. I've told you many times I'm not too interested in the number itself, just the general trend, what it tells us, the kind of indication of the picture. I think there's exceptionally heavy fighting going on in Robotyne at the moment, that area, to the exclusion of some other places maybe, where some of the front line may be calming down and it's certain focus points. Robotyne, I think, is where it's all at. I mean, I think there's so much on the line. The Russians appear to be throwing a kitchen sink at Robotyne, and that's why there's no massive success there, or no massive movement of the front lines. There are claims that there's 1.5 square kilometers taken by the Ukrainians yesterday in that area. There's also claims of counterattack north of Verbove. So different claims. It could be that the Russians are throwing everything into a counterattack, and that itself signifies how important that whole sector is to the Russian defense, and indeed to the entire counteroffensive. It's everything to play for, everything to win, everything to lose there. I think that's how important it is, and there is so much footage coming out from various areas on the front line, but I presume particularly around that Zaporizhia front line, of tank attacks, tank battles. I say tank battles are really rare. When I was talking about the value of the Leopard 1 tanks coming along with their fire control systems and thermal optics and whatnot, but I said, it's not often that they're going to be used to attack other tanks. Well, actually, there's been a couple of bits of footage of tank battles going on, so they are happening, even though they are rare. There's so much activity in that area, and a lot of it is being filmed. 10 tanks lost. Again, that's unsustainable. If you're going to lose 10 tanks a day at the rate that you're producing them to replace those 10 tanks a day, that is unsustainable. It's not as high as we've seen it, but it's also not as low as we've seen it. So that is, I think 10 is a significant number. 16 APVs, it's exactly the same rationale there. 22 artillery systems, lower than we have had for the last 3 or 4 days maybe, but still massive number. 22 artillery pieces is phenomenal. There was some conversation on my threads about how it is that the Ukrainians are able to be doing this now and not previously. And part of it comes down, according to some, to the attrition of Russian air defenses. So the air defenses, short-range air defense systems have been taken out. I mean, goodness me, there's like footage of 5 books being taken out at once and whatnot. They're all in the same bit of footage. So there is a lot of short-range air defense systems, medium to short to medium, but mainly short, and the accompanying sort of radars, electronic warfare systems being taken out. When we look at special equipment, yesterday 10 were lost, was it? If any of that is electronic warfare equipment, and then what that does is that attrition degrades the Russian capability to take out Ukrainian drones that are then able to operate with something like impunity in FPV, first person view drones, in taking out these bits of kit. And so they are just flying around. United 24, army of drones, 10,000 drone operators and gazillions of drones being sent to the front line. they are having an effect. And I think this attrition is largely due to counter battery fire. Obviously, we know the Ukrainians have the advantage there, at least in the southern area and maybe in Kherson as well. So counter battery fire and drone usage. So that is translating into a massive loss of really important equipment for the Russians. 3 MLRS yesterday is a big loss as well. The multiple launch rocket systems, they're on average losing maybe 1 1/3 a day since the beginning of the war. So to lose 3 in a day, and that's kind of been the case for the last 3 or 4 days as well. I've had a really high number of MLRS lost over this last week. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, again, that attrition, even if it's just 1 a day, is really going to hurt the Russians. 5 drones. Actually, there was a drone. That's not last night, the night before. There was a drone strike last night, a wave of drones attacking Kyiv mainly. We'll go into that later. 40 vehicles and fuel tanks. And this goes back to the point about drones and their ability to fly unhindered in many cases. And they are just hammering the Russian logistics. They're losing that kind of number a day. Again, rather like the other categories. So last week, losing that many a day, just getting hammered, the Russian logistics. Now, how much of this is accurate? How many of these are hits but didn't disable the vehicle or the piece of equipment? Don't know, right? So there's going to be some kind of overinflation, whether it's intentional or not, with these figures. But the general gist is it's not good for Russian equipment. 2 pieces of special equipment as well, which is always useful, although, that is above the wartime average. 365 times 2, no, it's just about on the average, isn't it? Maybe just below. So, but still going to hurt. So, really good stats there for the Ukrainians. Go to Oryx, the visual confirmation of losses. Now, I don't know if Oryx is, because people who had worked with Oryx doing the Oryx stats have moved on to War Spotting as he's closing up shop from the 1st of October. I don't know that he's actually catching everything at the moment. I think this is kind of a case of winding down. Andrew Perpetua, for example, is getting way more equipment on a daily basis than Oryx. So take these claims in context. Here we have 8 losses for the Russians, including 5 book, 4 destroyed, 1 damaged. I mean, that is a big loss. Those are air defense surface to air missile systems. And for the Ukrainians, we have 6. So approaching parity. There is an air defense system here, a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, ZSU-23 full Shilka. That's going to be sort of kind of an auto cannon. That's not high value to lose. So really, when you're looking at this, for me, that's like 5-1 in air defense, but that one isn't high value. The rest of these are kind of BMP 1s, 2s, M113. So not very high value stuff. I would say that, and here, when you look at the SPGs, 2 self-propelled guns, one's a 240mm mortar, which is a huge, devastating piece of equipment. So to lose one of them, I showed you that footage yesterday. I think even just looking at that loss, okay, there's only 8 there, but those 8 are fairly high value, and this 6 for the Ukrainians are of a lower value. So that gives you an indication what's going on. These are Andrew Perpetua, the mapper I depend on. He is also counting up losses and putting them on the spreadsheet. This is looking like parity today. So the Ukrainians, I think, are going to be losing quite a lot of equipment around that Robotina area, around the whole Zaporizhia front line, really. The Russians here, a couple of bits of electronic warfare, surveillance equipment, exactly what I was telling you about earlier. They lose that kind of stuff on a consistent basis, then it stops them being able to lose all of this stuff, because then the drones can work more effectively. You've got artillery, tanks, IFVs, trucks, and then look at all these civilian vehicles, these Bukankas. I'm not sure that I would call them civilian, to be honest. The loafs, I think the loafs are actually military. I would call them military trucks, but nonetheless, you get the sense that the change in the types of equipment being lost by the Russians at the moment indicates that they are running low on military vehicles to do the job of logistics, right? Even down to like using motorcycles. I saw a motorcycle and a sidecar being taken out in an FPV drone, I'm sure, a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, uh, there is that. So then when we go to the Ukrainians, actually, Ukrainians have lost a few bits of artillery. That's going to hurt. That's 3 M777s. And then you've got a number of T-64s and a T-72. So some tanks lost there. And then the rest are kind of usual MRAPs, IFVs, and APCs. They're going to be heavy on losing these because they're in attack and they're using predominantly infantry to do those attacks. And in order to use infantry, you've got to get your infantry to the attack positions. So what we see is a lot of things like Mastiffs, Humvees, and whatnot, driving the troops to the drop-off positions and then getting hit, or driving as far as reaching some mines and being disabled on mines, and then troops getting out. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that the troops are taken out with these. As I said yesterday, I showed you a bit of footage, or partially showed you some footage, of what looked like a striker or a similar APC getting disabled by like 4 mines. And then troops started getting out. They hung around a bit too close to the vehicle, and then it was hit with a precision, I don't know if it's a precision guided munition, but a shell that landed plumb on top of the vehicle. But still, people got out of the vehicle, and as far as I could work out, if not all, then most of the Ukrainian troops survived. And you're like, that's been disabled by 5 mines, I think I counted, and then a shell landing right on top of it. And still, it protected them. So, although they're losing these vehicles, it doesn't mean that they are losing the troops with them. The same actually with the Russian, even some of the BMP-1s and things that I've seen hit with ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles. And you think, well, that's everyone dead in there. This whole thing, kind of a massive explosion, is completely disabled, it's on fire. And then you see people getting out the pack. You're like, that's a BMP, and that's been utterly wrecked by that. But yet, it does enough to protect those people. Anyway, moving on. This is just, again, you could say it's anecdotal, but when you start seeing so many pieces of anecdotal evidence, it builds up a picture of reality, right? This is Chris Owicki again. This is pertinent because I think it's in Bakhmut area and there's fierce fighting going on there, and it gives you a sense of what's happening there. And when you see them trying to run out of Klishchivka, taking their sort of evacuating their injured troops and whatnot, you're thinking, is that, what's the context of this kind of activity, right? Right, sorry about that. Where was I? Random parental visit there. Mobilized Russian soldiers fighting near Bakhmut have recorded a video complaining about the brutal and incompetent behavior of their commander. They reject orders to execute comrades, refusing to fight, and abandon the wounded who say they're not being evacuated. Well, I was just saying that we have got evidence they do try and evacuate them, but the problem, I mean, it's difficult, right? The problem when you try and evacuate someone, it's usually kind of 3 or 4 people trying to lift someone to a point where an evacuation point where they can then get a vehicle out of there. But somewhere like Klishchivka, we've literally seen someone try to be lifted by 3 or 4 others, and precision munition landed right on top of them and takes them all out. So they become a much greater target because you're grouping a bunch of people around and you've got drones in the air. And then, even then, where do you take them? Because the ground lines of communication are being completely, not destroyed. They're under fire control, right? So even a vehicle coming in to pick someone like that up is a target. And so therefore, it's really difficult. And you can understand that evacuating troops becomes more costly for more troops than just leaving that one injured troop to kind of get on with it. So it's I can imagine it's just a really difficult situation. But however, like, it appears that the whole Russian doctrine of like executing comrades refusing to fight is a real challenge for them. In a 4-minute video, a group of at least 9 mobilized soldiers stay there from the 76th Division, probably the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, a nominally elite paratroop group. That's the one that's, well, at least part of them being sent down to Robotina, denounce what they call the criminal orders of their commander, call sign Rostov. So, although the date's not clear, it is, well, I'll go and look into this later, but it just another piece of the jigsaw to show that things aren't going well for the Russian troops. I mean, the number of these videos that are coming out compared to the number of videos we see from Ukrainian. In fact, we don't see any videos like this from Ukrainians now. I'm sure they've got things to moan about, but they aren't producing videos like this because I think some of their issues they have aren't going to be with the brutal. It might be about incompetent leaders, but these leaders aren't getting shot. You know, they're not shooting their own. They're not refusing to get to help the wounded, so on and so forth. So I think there are things are happening with the Russians that are very worrying if you are pro-Russian. Sky News has reported that a UK citizen fighting in Ukraine has been found dead with his hands tied behind his back. So this is another war crime. What do you think? Pro-Kremlin voices in the thread: Clive Engel, Solofo Life, and Trevor Shea. Like, what do you think about UK, or what do you think about, you know, pro-Ukrainians or Ukrainians themselves being found dead with their hands tied behind their back? So he's 31, went to fight Ukraine in the International Legion, has been found dead in Ukraine. Sky News has reported citing the UK Foreign Office. Found dead in a body of water with his hands bound behind his back. So that's sad, and just another indication that the Russians are not adhering to international the international legal framework concerning war. And Rebar says at least 6 Ukrainian boats wanted to land on Cape Tarkankut. So this is the very western side of Crimea. As a result of a Su-24M's bomber actions, 3 of the enemy boats went down. The rest retreated in the direction of Vilkovo. Also, the Ukrainians attempted to hit military facilities on Tarkankut with attack drones, but the attack was repulsed. That's according to Rebar. Take that with a pinch of salt. But I imagine, you know, there could well be boat losses for the Ukrainians. They are trying to do activities around here, amphibious activities. So I imagine it's not going to be easy for them to get there now that the Russians are aware that they're going to be doing that. Here is a first-person view. I'm not going to show it, but you can see all of these videos from the links in the description below, only because I keep getting restricted every time I do this. But nonetheless, this is a Mr. S, so a piece of artillery, and it goes up with a big old bang. So, you know, just to let you know that there's plenty of footage out there to help support the figures that the General Staff are claiming. Here we have a Leopard 2 winning a rare tank battle with 2 Russian tanks at a distance of 1.5 kilometers. Not sure when this was taken. It might be a little bit older, but it's just come out now. It's on the southern front, and it kind of blows up this tank here. Again, I'm not going to show it, sorry. But it blows up this tank there, and then the other tank sort of retreats and gets out of dodge. So there is quite a few of this kind of footage going on. Here's another one from the Horner group, part of the 116th Mechanized Brigade. Shows how Ukrainian tankers or tanks and their crew work in. I say tankers because speaking to someone who said the British prefer tank crew. They don't like being called tankies or tankers. It's just, but it's the Americans do. They work in the Zaporizhia region while being targeted by ATGMs and Lancet kamikaze drones. I mean, it's just being aware of all the targets. Just imagine that you're in a tank with a tiny view hole, and yeah, you do have some tech equipment inside to help you navigate and whatnot. But you're thinking, right, there's ATGM coming from over there. There's a tank over there. There's an IFB over there. Oh, and by the way, there's 3 drones up there, and it's just like, you know, wow. It must be an incredibly difficult situation to be in a tank in those kind of contexts. Anyway, as I say, just masses of footage coming out. Oleshki, which is by Kherson, so that is over here. Oleshki, just to the south of the Antonivsky Bridge, is being hammered by Ukrainian artillery. Thanks to JR, bit of a legend here, has done all the mapping today. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that, as ever. But we'll come to that later in the next video. A bit of Russia on fire. And Yaroslav, there's a fire at a former military registration and enlistment office. Lots of people sort of watching that go up in flames. Those kind of incidents are still, you know, commonplace in Russia. And that is happening. Right, we're going to go on to strikes now. Distance strikes. And we're going to, you know, quite a lot has happened overnight and in the last 24 hours. 26 out of 33 drones were shot down in a drone wave last night, mainly at Kyiv by the looks of it. Of course, for 26 out of 33 to be shot down, there's still 7 getting through, which is, a real challenge. Main target was Kyiv, where there was, potentially quite some damage done, because a big city like that, even if you shoot them over the city, they're exploding before they hit their targets. There's still a lot of explosive munitions falling to the ground and falling to a very dense sort of city. It's not good. So, as Tim White here says, Kyiv was attacked tonight. There have been about 8 loud explosions. This was last night he was saying this, but obviously, probably more since then. This Telegram channel claims this is one of Russia's attack drones being shot down, but I cannot verify it is from this evening. But yeah, pretty much, I'm pretty certain it was. So yeah, Kyiv was targeted. I don't know the outcome of that. Crimea was the target, the objective for a number of attacks yesterday. Traitor occupiers in Crimea claim they've already shot down 3 drones this evening. Governor Aksyonov announced that one was hit in northwest of the peninsula, and shortly after he claimed 2 more drones were downed to the west of Crimea. But then actually, more came out about that as the kind of night went on. Indeed, the day into the night yesterday, Crimea was just, I think, a bit of a major target. So explosions were heard in Old Crimea. Are they smoking again? And they report a thwarted attack on the Crimean bridge as well. 2 explosions rang out in the Crimean Peninsula in the Old Crimea region. Locals claim that there were 4 explosions. So the Russians will claim one thing, and then reality kind of seeps out, and they claim that they've taken out all the drones. But then you see stuff like this, like, really, did you? So something we do have documented photos or videos for is in the occupied Crimea. However, Tim White said today, but this is referring to yesterday. The yesterday I wrote about a big fire near a military unit. Now another video of the blaze in the Simferopol military unit on Kalinin. It can clearly be seen that there's a hangar on fire. So a military hangar was targeted, probably by a drone there. And then in Feodosia in Crimea, there was a big explosion. I've seen that from a couple of angles. So Feodosia is down there. I think that's Feodosia. But we've also got Simferopol area and Old Crimea area as well. So a number of places. And then the Russians claiming that there is activity up here with, attempted amphibious landings or whatnot. Fire also, then going back, then also near the Kerch Bridge as well. There was an attempted attack on the Kerch Bridge. Don't know how successful it was. Fire near the railway in Kerch. So it might not be the bridge itself, but the railway feeding onto Kerch Bridge. It is widely reported that grass near the railway is on fire, so that might or might not be damage there to the railway infrastructure. And then Tim White also said, most likely fictional tales from Russia's MOD, but Moscow today claims it destroyed 3 semi-submersible boats that tried to attack the Crimean bridge. Not content with that, they also say aircraft destroyed 4 high-speed boats with landing groups of special operations forces. So that's 4 high-speed boats, not the 3 that Rebar said, but the idea is that that's what, the claims are generally that they've blown up a bunch of stuff trying to attack Crimea. And this is a fire in Feodosia on Crimea, a forest fire in Feodosia. It's around Khrebet Teteoba, 15 kilometers from Stary Krim, where explosions were heard earlier. So I don't know if those are 2 separate instances there. Interesting thing is it's widely believed Russia has anti-aircraft monitors hidden there. So that could actually be a target that's been hit by Feodosia. And then, so lots of things hit and exploding around Crimea. Right, moving on then. I've already talked about that. So we'll come on to that in the next one. We have Russia's Ministry of Disinformation, MOD, has been in overdrive glorifying its own air defense. The most recent attack they repelled was in Bryansk this morning. Except the video shows no traces of air defense. They didn't say electronic warfare. And the explosion looks very close to the ground. In other words, it seems that there's been something hit in Bryansk that was genuine and it wasn't taken out by air defense. But, take all of these claims with some degree of skepticism both ways. But there's been a lot of activity in the air, that's for sure, over the last 24 hours. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Defmon says, nothing says freedom like armed men showing up at your door telling you to vote. So again, is this the liberation of the Russians are claiming? My pro... So my pro-Kremlin voices on the threads, is this liberty? Is this you liberating Crimea? Is this you... It's a bit quiet there, but that's announcements coming from that vehicle. Banging on the door. There's someone as an armed person there with the military helmets. Banging, banging, banging. So what was being announced from the vehicle was the following: elections in the Russia-occupied south of Ukraine. Military vehicle approaches the house. A voice on the PA says, inhabitants of the house number 32. Time to vote. I repeat, inhabitants of the house number 32. Knocking on the door. Knock on your own head, you, says the person inside. This is them forcing people to vote at basically at gunpoint or by intimidation, which is, of course, not democratic and rather problematic. Right, Budanov has been quite active in what he's been saying. Good to see Budanov discussing how the weather in the autumn won't make the kind of difference to the Ukrainian counteroffensive that people think. That's exactly what Phillips O'Brien and I'm not very good at pronouncing this guy, Mykola Bielskov, who's a research fellow at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. Anyway, they've got a new podcast, but they were talking about how actually the autumn weather won't affect the Ukrainian counteroffensive as much as some people might think. And Budanov is saying that himself. He says Ukraine will continue their counteroffensive even after the start of winter. The fighting will continue one way or the other. He's the head of intelligence, remember. It is more difficult to fight in the cold, damp, and mud. The fighting and our counteroffensive will continue. So even though it's more difficult, they're going to continue. And he's also said the war will not be long term. This is my personal opinion, which is based on the analysis of the data that we have. First of all, on the enemy. But again, if you're talking about 6 to 7 months, a year, then it's quite likely that you'll be right. In other words, yeah, it's going to last maybe 6 to 7 months, maybe a year. But this isn't a long-term conflict. This isn't a frozen conflict like some people are worrying about. The data doesn't support that. So I think, obviously, yeah, if anyone's going to be psyopsing, it's going to be Mr. Budanov here. But there could well be the understanding that the Russians don't have enough in the tank. And it goes back to what's going on in Robotina. Throwing the kitchen sink at this. How much stuff do they have to continue this war, the Russians? Do they have the kit? Do they have the trained personnel to do this? Do they have the appetite to do this? Political and popular appetite to continue this war? And I don't think so. And possibly that's what Budanov is referring to there. So not just tires, says Tim White. I said I'd come back to this. This is Russia's Genius protection systems having an upgrade. Netting support structures for each plane seems to be the idea. To be honest, I personally won't laugh at this. I think that's pretty sensible. There is a threat from above, from drones, and I'd say, if that's just parking a plane on a runway, you might as well do that, right? So I won't take the mickey out of that. I think that's pretty sensible. But again, what does it tell you? It tells you that genuinely the Ukrainians have developed aerial threats to be able to hit Russian assets deep into Russian territory. So that's what that tells you. Okay, and likewise, the Ukrainians doing their own kind of... Every time a coconut. Oh, come on, Piers, sort it out. So anyway, what I was going to show you is this is a decoy trying to attract things like Lancets rather than defend against them. As you can see, this is supposed to be a Stugna. It's just made out of cardboard boxes and cardboard tube and whatever. So Ukrainians have their own kind of ways to deal with aerial threats, which is not not protecting them in this case, but actually attracting them. So that's that. And anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll get back to you with the second piece somewhat later today. Apologies for the delay.